Good afternoon, everybody. I have 1 o'clock, so we'll get started. My name is Jason Gorley, and I am the Education Manager here at CPMA. Before we get started with today's webinar, I'm just going to run through a few little housekeeping items. I will be muting all participant lines to reduce background noise, so you'll hear a short message saying that the line's been muted, and I'll go over how to ask questions in just one moment.
The conference is in lecture mode.
Now, we do want you to ask questions and encourage you to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please use the chat window in the WebEx. I will collect those questions and pass them on to our presenter, who will answer them at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time with questions, then we will attempt to answer as many by email and get back to you as soon as possible. So again, please use the chat window for any questions. I will collect them and pass them to our presenter. Today's presentation is being recorded, and a recording will be made available through the CPMA community area. So keep an eye out for that notification coming out probably at the end of next week. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn things over to Jeff Hall, our food safety specialist, to introduce today's topic. Jeff.
So hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate with us on this webinar. I just wanted to start by thanking all the members who have helped us over the last, really few years when it comes to the Safe Food for Canadians Act and regulations. Now that we are all good to go with a coming into force date of January 15th, 2019, I know there's going to be a lot for us to do between now and then, but it should be fun. I'd like to thank DRC for participating in this webinar with us, and I'd also like to thank them, both Anne and Luke, for taking time out of their busy schedules and letting me drag them across the country to the 6 food safety forums that were held. The reception to those forums was excellent. I know that the members who attended, and including, we even allowed non-members to come to these forums, free of charge, because we thought it was so important. So I'd just like to thank Anne and the whole team at DRC for their participation, and of course we look forward to working with them as we move forward. So Jason, I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeff. And now I'd like to turn things over to today's presenter, Anne Fowley, who's in charge of special projects at the DRC. Anne?
Thanks, and welcome everyone, and appreciate having the opportunity to share this time with you. And special thanks to CPMA for including us in so much of what they've done over the last year and more. It's a great partnership, and it's been a good fit, and I think it's made a very wholesome presentation, or complete presentation, that we've been able to bring to people. So today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the DRC. I'm going to break it into two sections, if you will. We talk about the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, and of course food safety and traceability are top of mind, but there is so much more to the regulations than food safety and traceability. So I guess today I'm going to talk about the so much more. So that brings us to the DRC and the overview of the presentation. Why the founding principles, what do we do, and as I mentioned, the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. And I'm going to speak specifically to the trade and commerce portions of the regulations that relate to the DRC. 2 key pieces there, the need for a membership as well as the grade standards. So a little bit about the DRC for some of you who may not be familiar with us. Just kind of a quick overview of where we came from and why. Actually, the concept of the DRC goes back to the mid-1990s, and it really was a joint vision and exercise by leaders in the produce industry in North America. So we had people from Canada, United States, and Mexico, and the corresponding governments who had a vision for a united system for fruit and vegetable trade that would avoid trade irritants and facilitate effective trade dispute resolution. A strengthened North America trading bloc for fresh fruits and vegetables, and that each country would have a dispute resolution system, a licensing and inspection regime that was also backed by an insolvency tool. So DRC was established in 2000 through a provision of NAFTA, specifically Article 707, which pertained to dispute resolution, and specifically business-to-business private commercial disputes. We're often asked, given a lot of discussions that are ongoing today, if there are any changes to NAFTA, will that impact DRC? No, it will not. So if there were any changes to NAFTA, it's business as usual for DRC. So while there was a dispute resolution system that existed in the U.S. under PACA, the pre-NAFTA regulatory system that prevailed in Canada through the Canada Agricultural Products Act really did prove to be ineffective in resolving the majority of disputes and included no provision to address payment in situations of insolvency. Now, fast forward to the DRC being in business. Important to note that DRC awards are enforceable in most countries in the world. So the vision and the founding principles, just to recap and see where we are, fast forward 18, almost 19 years later, the DRC was established to fix the broken dispute resolution system in Canada. We can check that one off the list. There were 4 founding principles. Strengthen destination inspections. The Destination Inspection Service, that came into place in its current form in 2006. Working toward a single body licensing that would integrate the Cfia licensing and arbitration regulations requirement for the produce license with the requirement to be a DRC member in good standing. And of course now, with the final regulations having been published in Canada Gazette Part 2 last week, we can check that one fully off the list now. And the 4th principle was to develop and implement an insolvency tool in Canada that really would replicate the outcomes that we see with the PACA in the United States. So basically a PACA-like trust for implementation in Canada. And that one is outstanding. So 19 years later, we've got 3 out of the 4, and work is ongoing on the last one. So I guess just to summarize, DRC is a member-based organization whose core work is business-to-business private commercial dispute resolution. That's it, quite succinctly. Or in other words, DRC is a referee between parties when a purchase and sale do not go according to plan. So who are we today? Just if we look across the membership, this is just a bit of an overview of where members are from. As you can see, they are primarily from NAFTA countries, but there are non-NAFTA country-based members as well. So total membership today is just under 1,700. And in terms of global membership and those 66 countries, they range from South American countries, South Africa, Dominican Republic, Hong Kong, so they're a little bit of everywhere. And that does continue to grow, and it's certainly something that DRC will continue to work at and promote beyond continental North America. As far as the demographics of those nearly 1,700 members, what does it look like? So as would be expected, distributors and wholesalers, 40%. Growers, shippers, 32%, and then the balance is really a mix across brokers, retailers, processors, transportation, food service, and commission merchants. So I guess if we were to take that and then group it for a smaller picture of who the members are, it would be buyers at 58%, suppliers 32%, and others 10%. So that's an overview of the membership. Now, in terms of value, certainly DRC is well known and recognized for the suite of services that are offered. That includes trading standards, and certainly there's a value to the membership as an integral risk management component for any sound business plan for anyone engaged in buying, selling, and transporting produce. In terms of membership benefits, there are many of them. And I guess one that would be top of mind now today is that it fulfills the regulatory requirement that provides authority to buy, sell, or negotiate the sale or purchase of fruits and vegetables interprovincially, and internationally. So there is that regulatory component. But beyond that, certainly and importantly to the produce industry, the key benefit is a common set of trading standards and member responsibilities that promote the fair and ethical trading for produce entering the North American marketplace. That's key because one of the key things when one becomes a member, when you sign that application, you are agreeing to abide by the trading standards and the member responsibilities. So certainly there's a common start point for all members in how they engage in business. In terms of things that the DRC addresses within the mediation and arbitration services, look specifically at slow pay, partial pay, and no pay disputes, quality and condition problems from produce bought or sold within Canada, inter- and interprovincial, and internationally, as well as contract issues related to a breach of contract by either party. When we look at what we do and performance, if you will, of the dispute resolution process, 80% of disputes are resolved through informal mediation, generally on average within 24 days. 20% of disputes are resolved through arbitration, on average 73 days, and as one would expect, that is a more involved process. And 90% of arbitration decisions and awards are voluntarily satisfied. So just to summarize as far as the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, I mentioned the regulations address food safety and traceability, and that specifically within the regulations is described by any of the text relating to license. Trade and commerce, the authority to buy, sell, import, or export fruits and vegetables, that is described by a DRC membership, and that is the regulatory requirement. So the DRC's role and responsibility assigned by the regulations relate only to trade and commerce. So it's very, very specific. Some operations will require a food safety license and a DRC membership. Some operations will require only a DRC membership. And there are some operations that will require both a food safety license but not a DRC membership. So in any of those instances, it's very much going to be an assessment business by business of the respective operations and the activities that are being conducted. In terms of food safety, though, as I mentioned, DRC's purposes will focus solely on the trade and commerce. So I guess if we're to look at that visually, there's really two distinct columns, if you will, and I think this highlights quite nicely that food safety and traceability is the license. For trade and commerce, it's the DRC membership, and that is the regulatory requirement to engage in commerce for fruits and vegetables. I mentioned food safety. DRC, we stand down from those issues and generally refer, and not generally, we do refer questions on food safety and traceability to the experts, and there's a lot of great resources out there. Certainly, Cfia as the gatekeeper of the regulations, they have a lot of information and resources and expertise. But beyond that, there's also Canada GAP, there's CPMA, and there's the Canadian Horticultural Council. So certainly for any of the food safety and traceability questions, those are the go-to resources there. I had referred to integration of the CFIA produce license and the DRC membership. So the new regulations will replace the Canada Agricultural Products Act and the licensing and arbitration regulations. And those regulations had included the requirement for the produce license to buy and sell fruits and vegetables. So under the regulations, which are in force until the 15th of January, there have been and continue to be two options for the authority to buy and sell fresh fruits and vegetables. That's the Cfia produce license or the DRC membership. And it's in part because of the options where we often find that there's some confusion around the term license and DRC membership. So certainly that will definitely be falling by the wayside. And once the DRC started operations, over time the majority of produce license holders have migrated to a DRC membership. And currently there are only 18 businesses who hold a Cfia produce license. And certainly by the time the 15th of January rolls around, all of those will have had to change over to a DRC membership. So that's the summary on the food safety and sort of on the trade and commerce pieces. A bit of an overview if we compare the two. We'll start out first with what's actually in the regulations that will be coming into effect on the 15th of January. So on your left-hand side, this is the text from the regulations, and it is the prohibitions. So again, as I've already touched on, it's prohibited for a person to, and the list is there, sell any fruits and vegetables that are to be exported or sent from one province to another, receive fresh fruits or vegetables that have been imported, sent or conveyed from one province to another, and send or convey from one province to another or import or export any fresh fruits and vegetables. Within the regulations, the definition of a person, it can be an individual or an organization, including an association, a company, a corporation, a cooperative, also includes any other recognized legal entities. Then, following that, we have the exceptions. So if you fall in any of those categories within exceptions, you do not require a DRC membership. So clearly, if you're already a member in good standing of the Fruit and Vegetable Dispute Resolution Corporation, you are accepted. So anybody who is already a DRC member, it's business as usual. Any person who only sells fresh fruits and vegetables directly to consumers, if that person paid less than $100,000 for the fresh fruits and vegetables that they sold to consumers within the previous 12 months. And we understand the previous 12 months to be any day on which you are making that assessment. Any person who only purchases, sells, or negotiates the purchase or sale on another person's behalf, sends or conveys from one province to another, or imports or exports less than 1 metric ton of fresh fruits and vegetables per day. So that's a little under a pallet. Any person who only sells fresh fruits and vegetables that they have grown themselves, or if you are a registered charity as defined within the income tax. And none of this applies to nuts, wild fruit, or wild vegetables. So that is what's actually in the regulations. So if we compare what's currently in place, look at what's in the Safe Food for Canadians regulations and compare that to what has been in place and is currently in place under the licensing and arbitration regulations, there are a few differences, and I'll point to a couple of them. I referenced the $100,000 threshold as far as the 12-month purchases. That had previously been $230,000. So that is a change. And the other key change is the daily volume threshold. So in the regulations, as will come into effect, it's 1 metric ton of fresh fruits and vegetables per day. Under the licensing and arbitration regulations, there was no threshold. Under the current regulations, there's also a reference to the Akwesasne Reserve. That is still in the regulations, but it's within a different place than it had been previously. But it is still there. So those are key differences, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples that will provide a bit more detail. So who's most likely to be impacted by the requirement for DRC membership? So previously, any persons who bought fresh fruits and vegetables within a province but sold outside of the province were not required to have either a CFIA license or a DRC membership. So under the regulations, that will be a requirement for a DRC membership. So an example is I buy from my neighbors and I sell the product to buyers outside of the province or country. So that is new. A person who only sells fresh fruit and vegetables directly to consumers, if that person paid more than $100,000 for the fresh fruits and vegetables they sold to consumers within the previous 12 months. As I noted in the comparison table, the previous exemption threshold was $230,000. Who's most likely to be impacted by this? Small independent retailer who purchases more than $100,000 from outside of the province. Farm markets or roadside stands that purchase $100,000 from outside of the province. And the provision is not applicable to the purchase and sale within provincial borders. So again, it's a bit of a change there. Also, and I referenced it, the metric ton. So any person who purchases, sells, or negotiates the purchase or sale on another person's behalf, or moves that product from one province to another, or imports or exports more than that 1 metric ton per day. So again, some examples there: a farm market or roadside stand. Those who purchase or sell outside of their province of residence or business. Vendors selling to jobbers who supply farm markets, restaurants, or institutions across the provincial border. The provision is not applicable to purchases and sales within provincial borders. So one of the things the DRC has done is develop self-assessments to help folks sort out whether or not they may be subject to the requirement for a DRC member. So what we've done is group the sector into subsectors, and they are agent, growers agent, and broker, farm markets and direct to consumers, grower, shipper, packer, retail, food service, and certain restaurants, as well as wholesalers and distributors. So we've developed a self-assessment for each of those subsectors, and the self-assessments each include definitions, some excerpts from the regulation, as well as some questions and answers that you can go through and hopefully be able to determine whether or not you are subject to the requirement. As always, if there's ever any questions, certainly contact the DRC Help Desk, and I'll have information coming up about that. So this is what the self-assessments look like. As I indicated, they are by subsector, and the Q&A within each one is specific to those circumstances. So I guess to summarize on the Safe Food for Canadian regulations from a DRC perspective, what we would say to you is be aware of and understand the regulatory requirement to be a DRC member in good standing to buy and sell fresh fruits and vegetables. Take advantage of the tools that we have to self-assess to determine your status, which will be either that you are subject to the regulations and require a membership, that you're exempt and do not require the membership, or that you may still be uncertain, and in that case, contact the DRC, and certainly maximize the expertise and the availability of DRC team members and available resources to help out in that regard. So that was one of the two portions on the trade and commerce side of things. The other one I wanted to touch on briefly is around grade standards. Last thing, though, I would add, in terms of other tools that the DRC has prepared, we do have a fairly detailed Q&A document that we're calling Exporting to Canada for countries outside of Canada, which basically has a lot of questions around the DRC, what we do, why one would be required to have a membership, either linked directly to the Safe Food for Canadian regulations or other good business reasons to have a DRC membership. So we have that document, and then we have a shorter one that we've prepared as kind of a cheat sheet for those who are located in the United States looking to sell fruit and vegetables to Canada. So both of those documents are available as well, and certainly would encourage you to have a look at them or contact us to secure a copy. Certainly one of the things that we say when we talk to anyone, whether it's at trade shows or some of the work that we do on our own with embassies or jointly with CPMA, is what we say to people is if you're looking to sell fruits and vegetables to Canada, do not sell to someone who is not a DRC member. And certainly now with the regulations, it is a regulatory requirement as well. So that's a clear message that we do send out. So I've talked about the trade and commerce pieces, and I'm quickly going to go into the grade standards because I think there's some things there that we're working on that will be of interest as well too around the grade compendium. So grade standards and the Safe Food for Canadians regulations. The grade requirements in the existing regulations are consolidated into two documents that are incorporated by reference. One of them is the beef, bison, and veal carcass grade requirements that are maintained by the Canadian Beef Grading Agency according to conditions outlined in a memorandum of understanding between the grading agency and CFIA. And then the Canadian Grade Compendium, which consolidates all other grade requirements into a single document organized by commodity that's maintained by CFIA. So they took the existing 14 or 15 standards that were there for everything from honey, chicken, eggs, and so forth, and have put them into one other document. We fit as Grade Compendium Volume 2, Fresh Fruits and Vegetables. So those are the requirements, and they're broken out by fruit and vegetable. So why is that important to us? Certainly grades matter to us because they are foundational to the DRC's Good Arrival Guidelines and trading standards, and they do serve to establish evidence and help resolve trade disputes. They also provide a measure of consumer confidence and have a direct link to food labeling and other related modernization initiatives. They also are important as well, too, because certainly today fresh produce moves readily globally. So often what ends up happening is that you've got a buyer and seller who are separated by large geographic distances. So the compendium really becomes the lexicon or generally recognized and accepted language for describing fruit and vegetable commodities and associated defects. It establishes the expectations for good arrival condition, given that fruit and vegetables are generally purchased unseen. And again, they are a basis for establishing a breach of contract. Part of DRC's vision was always that when the time was right, we would look to take on more of an ownership and responsibility in maintaining grade standards going forward. So if we look at the linkages around the grade standards and DRC and CFIA, they're already quite linked, if you will. So we've got the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, and then within that is the Canadian Grade Compendium and the Destination Inspection Service. DRC membership is by regulation, very much linked to the regulations. And of course, under the DRC, we have our bylaws, we have the operating rules and the trading standards. And of course, those all go back and forth with the grade compendium and the work that goes on with the Destination Inspection Service. So it's kind of a visual of how it all currently fits together. In 2009, through the Fresh Produce Alliance, which was an initiative of DRC, CHC, and the CPMA, there was a first run-through looking at the grade standards to see where or how they should be amended to better serve industry. And there were some 700 recommendations for change that were proposed. So those have been on hold since that time. And now is the perfect opportunity to move forward with that and do a refresh. So what's next then in that regard? to help DRC and industry, I guess, achieve that vision of having more of an ownership and oversight of the grade standards. We have initiated a project that will look to identify persons in the industry with an interest and working knowledge of specific grade standards to review them and recommend changes, and to work with Cfia to determine the terms and conditions of an agreement which will see the compendium ultimately reside with and be managed by the DRC. So we've completed phase 1 of the project, whereby we took the grade standards as they are currently. So that would be in your left-hand column. We developed a common template to work across the 30 grades. Then there's a place where we've integrated the proposed changes from 2009, and then there will be a section within the template to either reaffirm those changes and or propose additional changes due to things that may have gone on in the market over the last while. So that's what the template looks like. It will be common to all the commodities. We felt that was important because in some instances, some people will be working on more than one commodity. You can see what the document would look like with some of the changes integrated from 2009. In some cases, there was very little change. In some cases, there were significant change. And the people who worked on it at the time did that not in isolation of only the Canadian standard, but also looking at the USDA grade standards, given that the markets are so integrated. So there's actually going to be a lot of mix and match in what the industry recommended and any further proposed changes around keeping some of these Canadian pieces, but taking some of the U.S. pieces and making them part of the Canadian grade standard where it actually makes sense to do so. The other thing that they also did as part of that exercise, and that we will actively be doing as well too, is looking at the quality inspection manual. Many of you would never see that, but certainly it's a very important tool for Cfia and the Destination Inspection Service. But more importantly, it's also a very integral tool to DRC when we're looking at disputes, contracts, and so on and so forth. So again, we looked at the inspection manuals in 2009. We'll be doing that again. But here also, we also looked at the USDA inspection guidelines and their visual aids. And again, with the inspection manuals, there's very much a mix and match of keep some Canadian pieces and drop some Canadian pieces in favor of inserting U.S. information. That's going to be a fairly large undertaking. It will be a staged approach over the next 2 years. We're finalizing a schedule as to how we will stagger those consultations. Obviously, we'll not be doing all 30 commodities at once, but it's going to be an exciting piece for DRC, and the end goal is that the grade standards would be housed within and maintained by DRC, but of course with the Cfia backdrop. Again, just some other examples of some of the nature of proposed changes around the quality inspection manuals. And these were 3 that I just picked out: carrots, lettuce, rutabagas. But again, all 30 commodities were looked at. One of the key things that will be a part of this project and that stakeholders will be asked to comment on as well too is the process going forward, because obviously a consultation mechanism that is comprehensive and inclusive will need to be in place in order to look at integrating changes going forward. Certainly expect that a test market provision will be maintained. It will not necessarily be used in the same way it's been managed over the past number of years, because the grade change was so complicated and needed to go through a regulatory change. That will no longer be the case. It will be a much more user-friendly and market-responsive process to do so. So with that, that kind of goes through our side of things on trade and commerce. We have a dedicated section of the website to the Cfia regulatory requirement. You'll find those self-assessments there. The exporting to Canada pieces are there as well too. On the proposed on the regulatory changes, all of that information in the self-assessments, there are in English, French, and Spanish, which are the DRC's normal operating languages, but we also have had those made available in Chinese and Punjabi as well, because certainly there's a large number of folks in the industry who that is their primary language. So with that, turn that over for any questions, and Luke, DRC's Vice President, is here with me as well to help pick up on anything that I might have missed and help respond to any questions. So I hope you found this helpful.
Perfect. So just to remind you that if you have any questions, please use the chat window and I will pass that on. So we have had one question come in. Since exempt persons won't be a DRC member, example, growing and selling their own products, will they still need any form of licensing to sell products?
Licensing, and I'm going to, I guess, loosely interpret or define that word. I mean, there could be provincial and municipal requirements that certainly we would not be aware of. And certainly within the context of the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, again, licensing falls back to the things around food safety and traceability, the need for preventative control plan. So there may well be a need for a food safety license, but that would be independent from the requirement to be a member in good standing of the DRC.
Perfect. One more question that we have. What happens if I buy from someone who is not a DRC member?
Oh, I'll answer that. Sure, thanks. It's a good question. So if you buy from somebody who's not a DRC member, it's business as usual if it's a normal situation and the product comes along and you've accepted it properly and it's great condition and it meets all your specs and everything like that. As a DRC member, you still have to treat the non-member according to our trading standards, prompt payments, all of our rules and stuff like that, properly accounted for product and stuff like that on your invoicing, and as if it's a normal DRC member, because those are your obligations as a DRC member. If the problem comes up and you have a dispute and there's a condition problem with the shipment that you bought, first thing to do is get a Cfia destination inspection on the product. Always get a destination inspection on the product. Then after that, you can contact the DRC and we can help you out. We can help you potentially negotiate with the buyer or the seller who's not a non-member or who's a non-member and give you some advice on how to negotiate, potentially a new price or some, reduced pricing and stuff like that, depending on what the condition is. Advise you what, how severe the damage is or the problems with the load are. And if you would like, we could also contact the other party on your behalf, but we never do unless you were explicitly asked to. The other thing that we can do is we can offer you the potential of going into arbitration with that individual. Even though they're a non-member, they may be willing to sign a voluntary arbitration agreement and still come to the table and arbitrate the dispute with, have DRC arbitrate the dispute for them, for both of you. Failing that, and that the individual doesn't want to move and you think that there's an option here to go to court or they want to take you to court or something like that, still contact the DRC. Make sure that you've had that inspection done. That'll be good evidence if you have to go to court on anything. Contact the DRC. We can certainly help you develop your case along technical lines and along condition, industry standards, and those types of things, and we can certainly help in that area. And that's about it.
Perfect. Any questions? Just a reminder, use the chat window. We have a couple more. How is the DRC evolving as industry and technologies advance?
Certainly we look to, there's so many mechanisms and just live information out there as far as changes in the marketplace, situations, early warning signals around what's going on in the industry and with businesses in the industry. So certainly those are very much things that we keep on top of and rely to members and non-members to either provide directly direct information to us, or we constantly monitor other information that's out there. We're always looking to update our system. Certainly as we move forward with the grade standards, that will be a piece as well too that we'll be integrating into our systems, and certainly technology will help with that as well. Luke, anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That we do monitor things, like if you look at recent data loggers on temperature recorders and stuff like that, including all sorts of locational, positional-based information that's being integrated. That kind of stuff we monitor, we learn about that, see how it's affecting things. We bring that into our office, we talk about it, how those technologies and those types of things, electronic logging for drivers and stuff like that. We're following that stuff as well, making sure that we're keeping ahead of it, so that if a dispute comes into consideration, and these technologies may play a role in handling that dispute, that we're on top of it. So we do monitor those things. We also modernize our standards whenever something comes in that has an impact. Most recently, we're just about to relaunch new mediation and arbitration rules, because we reformatted them, and we're bringing them up to the New York Convention standards. So there's those types of things. We do a lot of work around that kind of stuff on an ongoing basis. So, yeah.
No, that's good, Luke, because we're always looking at those types of things internally in our dispute resolution processes as business changes. But thanks for bringing up transportation, Luke, because that's something that is important to us and that we're getting a lot more questions on, and certainly we do have transportation companies that are our members there. And that's probably an area where there are lots of things that are continuously evolving. Another area as well, too, that we watch is fair trade, because that's becoming something that's, I mean, it's been there for some time, but it seems to be becoming more common in a lot of people's language and business dealings, and then how do you determine, is it or isn't it, and what do you base that on? So that's something certainly that we're keeping an eye on as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't just watch technologies, we watch policies and everything else that come along, and provide that type of, relay that kind of information back to our members.
Perfect. So I have one more question. So if you have a question, please get it in the chat window now. Otherwise, we may not get it before we shut down today's webinar. The last question I have right now is, how is DRC membership going to be enforced?
No, appreciate that question, and certainly it is one that we hear fairly regularly. In terms of enforcement, if we speak from a regulatory perspective, and certainly we cannot speak for the regulator. What we can relay, I guess, is what we hear from them in different presentations that we do, where they are also present doing presentations. It's not going to be a priority in terms of where they are going to allocate resources. Their resources will be certainly more focused on food safety and traceability. So from our perspective, certainly anything that we see within the industry, I mean, we're constantly monitoring all kinds of publication to kind of see who's doing business, who's new in the business, those types of things. So we have a very good network in place for that, if we're reaching out to what I would describe as prospective members in that regard. And certainly we rely a lot on peers to be watching what's going on in the industry. A lot of our own members watching what's going on in the industry, or through our own networking, we will hear things of, well, did you hear so-and-so is now in the business, or this business is doing whatever. So it doesn't speak to enforcement from a regulatory perspective, but certainly from our point of view, it's one way that we're always looking at the complexion of the industry out there and the players there. And as we move toward January 15 and beyond that, there's a lot of different things that we're going to be doing as well, too, in terms of getting information out there on the regulatory requirement through organizations, through more direct contact with provincial associations. There'll be a lot of outreach to provincial farm market associations. Certainly we've already had lots of interaction with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Retail Council of Canada.
Yeah, no, those are good points. There's also a few other things. I mean, if you look at from a regulatory perspective, having worked at the Cfia for 23 years, I can speak to some of the things that they'll be doing. They'll probably be doing a soft enforcement at first, just looking for voluntary compliance from most people. Then they'll move into a complaints-driven basis. But also when they're out there and they're finding people that may need a Cfia license for food safety reasons, if it's into fresh fruits and vegetables, that may trigger them also to ask if they have a DRC membership, if they require one. On the import side of things, it's going to be fairly easy for them. If you don't have a food safety license if you need one, or a DRC membership if you need one, the shipment will be stopped and you won't get it across the border. The intra-provincial stuff, or between provinces, probably end up being complaints-driven, and that type of situation, that's where they get most of their information from, or just random inspections and stuff, where they monitor ads in the marketplace and stuff like that. Marketplace monitoring is what they call it. So they'll be probably doing a lot of that. We also have an internal enforcement process where we can discipline members who are potentially not, who haven't done such a good job playing by the DRC rules, or if we expel somebody and they want to come back. We do have bonding provisions. We also sanction individuals if they've caused harm to the industry. So when we expel them or terminate them, we can sanction individuals and put them on the list. So that if they do come back, and we share that information with their members, letting them know that these individuals or companies have caused harm in the past. So just beware. But we can also enforce a bond if they do come back. That bond can be utilized to pay out to members and others should a problem come up again in the future and stuff like that. So those are some of the tools that we have access to.
What's the penalty in place if you're not a DRC member?
From a CFIA perspective, they haven't come out with that yet. They do have, under the new regulations, they do have the provision to put AMPs out there. I'm sure some people may be familiar with AMPs from a phytosanitary perspective. If you're a trusted traveler, or if you're not a trusted traveler, but if you're a traveler and you come back with some food, as a person, you can be hit up with an $800 AMPs right on the spot, pay it right away, you only pay half of it. They have those types of ticketing type of tools. They haven't prescribed any AMPs yet. Same with the fees. We're all still waiting on what those fees are going to be for the licenses and all that those activities, so they haven't prescribed that yet. But we're anticipating that they'll probably come out with all of that stuff before January, sometime before January. So you might want to watch their website, not only to figure out it's inspection.gc.ca. You might watch that and go to that website to figure out, first of all, if you need a license, and also look for their consultations that might be coming out on fees and AMPs and those types of activities.
Perfect. So that's all the questions that I have in the chat window. So going once, going twice, 3 times. So I'm sure if you have any other questions, the contact information is on the screen. I'm sure DRC will be more to help you out. Other than that, until next time, remember to seek out new knowledge, to gain new skills and abilities, and basically never stop growing. Have a great day.
You will now be connected by the moderator.
All right.